It's a boy. Here's your relook at the NECA toys. This is the Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5, The Dream Child, Freddy Krueger. Dream Child Freddy from A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5 The Dream Child was part of NECA's 7-inch scale, the Nightmare on Elm Street Series 3 action figure line. Now discontinued and harder to find, the figure was first initially released back in August 2012. Before we get a closer look at Dream Child Freddy, the first thing, of course, we're going to do is figure out how tall the figure stands. On average, all these Freddys are about the same size. Now, that does change a little bit when they factor in, of course, the articulation on some of the Ultimate Freddys that were released down the road. But most of these Staction lower torso Freddys are about the same height to one another. We're going to stop the tape measure right there. And according to the readouts, you're looking at Dream Child Freddy standing 7.2 inches in height. And that in centimeters works out to be 18.3 centimeters tall. Just for a couple of size comparisons, we can bring in some of the other Freddys that we've looked at in the past. I wanted to bring in one of the earliest Freddys. This was from A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 1. One thing that's interesting about these particular figures, there we go, is that they do share the same style of lower torso, that staction stance that Freddy Krueger is in. These figures are pretty much, like I said, carbon copies to one another. There's, of course, things that they change with things like sleeves, the torso and the head, for example. And then just to show you how that stacks up, say, versus one of the newer Freddys, here is the Ultimate Freddy Krueger from A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3. I know we're kind of jumping all over the place on timelines here. Again, the figures are roughly about the same height. I might even say that when it comes to the Ultimate figures, due to the new articulation that they incorporate into the lower half, these figures tend to be slightly smaller, it seems, than their taller, older counterparts here. Looking at the figure's accessories, why don't we first start where the beginning of the film starts, the birthing of baby Freddy. This is, of course, how he's resurrected. And sister, he is one of God's creatures. Find solace in that. Could you imagine? I don't know if I'd find much solace birthing a creature like Freddy Krueger, which I might also add still has his umbilical cord attached to the bottom section here. He's very deformed, as you can see. He's not fully developed in the leg department, at least. And he's an overall pretty neat looking accessory. He does have a little bit of posability working in his favor. You can move his head up and down and you can rotate it back and forth. You can technically also rotate baby's head all the way around. One thing I really like about it is not only is it detailed quite nicely, but they also added this gloss sheen, like this clear coat over top of it. So not only does it make the details certainly stand out, but it gives it that permanent wet, slimy look that you would expect from a little sluggish Freddy Krueger. And of course would slither his way across the floor until finally resurrecting himself in his full size and stature here. Though of course there are a few things on this particular Freddy that isn't quite right just yet. But again, I really like the fact that they included such a thing, even though, like I said, it doesn't have any posability in the arms, and certainly in one of its legs is it does have two legs. It certainly isn't going to be walking around on these legs anytime soon, but it's certainly a nice looking accessory to come included with a figure. Freddy Krueger also comes included with an alternate head sculpt, which I suppose we probably will address in a second. The next one we'll look at, though, is his rather dusty-looking fedora that he has to just kind of pick off the ground and dust himself off, and of course before he puts it on top of his head. The fedora is made up of softer plastic, and you can see that they've applied a nice dusting of a slightly lighter brown color against the surface of a more dark brown. It's got a nice looking fedora, nothing new we've seen here before. It does actually say 3 on the inside. I always found that was clever the way they've done that. I wonder if it actually is because this is Freddy Krueger from Part 3, not this Freddy Krueger necessarily, but I'm wondering if maybe the fedora is the same one that they used for Dream Warriors Freddy, and that's why it actually says 3 on the inside. I mean, that's just more speculation than anything else. I wasn't certainly there at the time that they developed this figure, so like I said, it's just more a guess on my part than anything else. The fedora is a softer plastic. It does fit over top of his head. I kind of actually prefer to have this particular Freddy displayed without his fedora, but that's entirely your prerogative, your way to go and display if you want. Like I said, I just like to display Freddy without the hat on this case here. Before we look at his alternate head sculpt, we're going to address, of course, the figure that comes included, or the main figure, of course, for this review, and that is Dream Warriors Freddy. I guess what we'll do now is we'll bring in the alternate head sculpt so you can see the difference between the two. Ooh, what an ugly looking mug. Not that this one is any of a one that's going to be winning a beauty pageant anytime soon, but I really like this one. I'm not really so much sold on this one right here. I kind of would have hoped that they would have given him the smile that he has at the beginning of the film where he says it's a boy and he's got his arms crossed. I mean, you don't get that really with either one of these head sculpts. This is certainly a more angrier looking Freddy, with at least to its credit, gets a chance to showcase some rather gruesome looking teeth. It actually looks like he's got a gum on top of his teeth. I think that's rather actually his tongue, but looking at it, it looks like his teeth are actually a teeth sandwich. Isn't that gruesome? Thanks for leaving that thought in our heads. The teeth, like I said, are interesting enough. They're very gray in nature, and I almost feel like it kind of pulls a little bit away from the face. The face isn't so much the issue. I think the face head sculpt is pretty good on this one, but I don't really care for the teeth being visible. Again, if they had only gone more something like similar to this with a big smile on his face, something like that, or laughing, I think would have been a nice touch as well. But those are the two head sculpts that they come included with. Again, I kind of like this one more so. This particular Freddy is one of the interesting Freddys that we've gotten before. Sort of in the same way as the Springwood Slash, there are certain elements to this particular figure that have not seen, oh, there we go, have not seen newer releases, likely due to the fact that it's got so much additional new tooling. But I mean, really, if you think about it, for example, like these arms, this one particular arm, this regular arm here is nothing different, nothing new. We've seen this arm on Freddy before. But this one right here has an elongated forearm, and certainly an elongated arm continued from the sleeve, that this would be hard to pull off in a newer figure. But really, when you think about it, NECA's already got this in their catalog. I mean, they've already got the pieces available. Why not just use the brand new tool, I should say, brand new sculpts or brand new castings from the original mold? I mean, they have it anyways, right? Anyways, one of the things, certainly the downsides, I suppose, of being resurrected from a baby so quickly is that, of course, he hits that awkward stage where he's not fully developed. It happens to the best of us. Maybe your hands don't necessarily look like this, though, while you're hitting puberty. Freddy puberty, like I said, was like that. It had to happen so quickly at the beginning of the film that, like I said, he didn't quite grow into his body right away. He's got really large, or at least one large hand, a very long sleeve. And I think the sleeve isn't so much the longer sleeve than what we've gotten before. I feel like the cuff is a little longer than this arm right here. If you look at the glove and you look at the sleeve here, the cuff is a little longer on this side than it's on this side right here. I don't think the arms are necessarily, well, they are a little bit, certainly a little bit longer than one another if you look at the elbow to elbow ratio from that point on. This is definitely a longer arm. Yeah, see, it's a little bit longer on that side right there. But I mean, there's nothing to say that NECA simply can't just take this whole piece right here and just, produce brand new castings of this piece right here, which obviously would be two parts. The hand would be separate from the rest of the sleeve. I know I'm spending a lot of time talking about the sleeves. Let's talk about, again, those hands. Gruesome looking hands, covered in a semi-gloss clear coat over top of it, again, like Baby Freddy. So everything on this particular Freddy just has this really interesting slimy look to it. The hands certainly do a great job of looking disfigured, right down to the fact he's got these veins alternating in colors of green and red, similar to his sleeve, similar to Christmas, actually. This is not certainly something that you would be wishing for Christmas, like having a deformed hand like this, birthed again from this, and this being the starting point of what would lead to this right here. I really think the hand is neat. I mean, that's a neat designed looking hand. And again, I love the fact that it's got that clear coat over top of it. So it does have really a great job of reflecting the light off when you look at it. Just really neat and gruesome the way that they've done that. Like that it's a continuation from the sleeve. Okay, so like the other thing on this particular Freddy, which is certainly distinct, obviously it's also his head. The torso isn't so much. I mean, we've seen things like this before. It's brighter colors, sure, yeah. But then the other thing that he has, didn't startle you with a gruesome looking foot either. This giant foot that looks like it got run over in a cartoon by a giant car, as you can see, is a very flat-footed Freddy. long toes. Actually, they're all almost the same length to one another. That's very jarring just on its own. I knew somebody that actually had similar length toes. It was really hard to look at. And here with Freddy, it's very hard to actually look at his feet looking like this with all the same length of toes. You would think the sized foot would be the thing that would bother me. No, actually quite the contrary. The equal length toes is actually bothering me more so. Gray toenails are also something that clearly isn't so much the issue for Freddy. And not only would I advise probably getting some fungus medication possibly for those toenails, but the fact that they are very gray and just grossly lengthed as well. You can see like some of them are just kind of growing off to the edge of the foot. You think that would be the end of it. I'm sure Freddy is fine to the idea of not cutting those. It's a really gruesome looking foot though. I know I'm spending a lot of time talking about Freddy's feet, but I really think the sculpting is quite nice on this. So again, like one thing we obviously want to talk about in this particular figure is could they potentially release this guy again? Well, there's always, of course, the topic that you could take the sleeve off. You could take this forearm off, for example. This isn't so much the issue. I mean, obviously, you could even just try to take... I've heard from some of you guys that you guys have actually heated these up and removed the torso piece altogether. So in a case here of Freddy, that's probably what you could do, although I haven't experimented the idea of doing it yet. Heating it up and just removing the torso piece off. The other thing you'd obviously want to do is remove the foot off, and then you just swap that out with a fully articulated Freddy. It is going to be something I'm going to consider to do at one point down the road. It's going to be a little pet project of mine to upgrade our Freddys, at least the ones in my collection. That is until, of course, the day comes, knock on wood, that NECA Toys does give us a version of this particular Freddy with some articulation on his lower legs. If that doesn't happen, I'm certainly still pleased to the fact I actually picked up this particular figure, despite for the fact that, yes, he does have slightly outdated lower legs. Again, the calling cards of this particular Freddy is elongated arms, elongated feet, and a more brightly colored striped sweater. In previous instances, Freddy had a slightly more darker sweater, but this one is really relatively, like I said, bright. Freddy appears here more cartoony than maybe some of his earlier instances. I liked the sculpting on this particular figure, though truthfully I don't like the design of Freddy's makeup from Dream Warriors. I feel really it's one of the weakest. I say Dream Wars, I meant to say Dream Child, is definitely for me one of the weakest makeups for Freddy Krueger in all the Nightmare films. I don't really personally like it, but somehow it actually translates to one of the more unique looking head sculpts of the things that NECA have released. I mean, a lot of times when you do get Freddy, I mean, we'll bring in this one here, for example. This one happens to be from Dream Wars, which I was talking about. I mean, if you look at this Freddy, there's a real notable thing about Freddy. I mean, you can check off the things that you'd expect to see from Freddy, but there's something about the Dream Child Freddy that has really unique characteristics to it. It doesn't have necessarily as much the color that maybe this one has, for example, but I think it has a whole lot more personality to it. It's one of my favorite Freddy head sculpts that we've gotten from NECA Toys. Again, I would be thrilled the idea of getting this guy again. Simply, again, you're just only having to take the head sculpt. I mean, that is already something that they have in their catalog. Take this sleeve, the arm, they already have that in their catalog, and take the foot. And simply all they have to do is then just release this figure again with the much needed articulation that I think he rightfully deserves. Speaking of his articulation, I guess just before we do that, let's just look at his glove. It's still an issue, of course, where you have warped fingers. This one isn't as terrible as some of the ones I've seen in the past. It does have some nice detailing done, though it gets a little lost, unfortunately, on the pieces on his fingers. While the sculpting is certainly there, the paint ends up kind of leaving it and letting it down a little bit because all those little scarrings on his fingers isn't, showing a little bit more. This is a notable glove, at least on this Freddy, as he does have the copper plates on each one of the fingers, and a more brass-colored plate on the bottom of his glove, the actual hand. Speaking of his hand, I mean, there's a detailed look of what his inside of his hand is. I mean, I really like the fact that even the inside of his fingers, each one of his fingers at least, has the opened area colored in the same flesh tone as his palm that's visibly open as well. Anyways, let's talk about his articulation. I could spend a lot of time really talking about this particular figure. It is one of my favorite Freddys, surprisingly enough. Head moves up and down, and it also rotates back and forth. You can also rock it back this way. But Freddy also has an additional neck articulation, which is really actually quite strange. I think on this particular figure as well, I had an issue in the past, if memory serves me correctly, where I had pulled Freddy's head off to replace it with this one right here, the one that we had just talked about before. And this particular Freddy, yes, if memory serves me correctly, when I pulled the head off, it basically ripped the whole neck off from his torso. I ended up having to widen the neck, just kind of pry it open a bit so I could fit everything back in. Because literally, this whole piece right here, it was kind of like this part right here, from thumb to thumb, that had come off. And I had to put that back into place. You can almost kind of see the way they've done it. And I wonder, I'm just going to kind of navigate it out just slightly for a bit so you guys can see it. It is actually a separate piece from the rest of his torso. I'm wondering if they actually did this as well, so that when it came to coming up with new Freddys, all they would really have to do is sculpt from basically like the shoulder up, or at least this part right here up, and then give us, of course, a brand new head. Maybe that was one way that they could still make use of the same torso piece, because again, you're really only just getting a brand new head and brand new neck sculpt. So that's probably what ended up happening. But yeah, kid you not, I popped this head off, and the whole thing, I can even see it happening right here, the whole thing popped right out. I'm trying to remember if that was actually part of the initial review. Anyways, though, getting ahead of ourselves, the head does rotate up and down, hinges back and forth. It's remarkable what things will remind you of other stuff. The shoulders hinge out. Not quite at a 90-degree angle, but just a little less than that, maybe about a 45. The arms rotate all the way around. He does have a bend at the elbow, which you can also rotate the forearm back and forth. And Freddy Krueger, just mindful of his finger blades, don't bend his finger blades. His gloves also rotate all the way around. At least this one hand rotates all the way around. The other one does the exact same thing, just a little bit further away from the elbow. The hand rotates, as it does have its own independent ball joint. I like that they've done that. Upper torso ball joint, and then, unfortunately, yeah, from the waist down, nothing. Sure, he does have articulation in the feet. His boots, or shoes, for example, do have a hinge up and down. You can rotate those back and forth. And even the disfigured foot with all the same length toes, ooh, it's going to be my nightmares tonight, does also have its own articulation as well. And just in case you're curious, I don't know if you are, but in case you were, he does have peg holes on the undersides of his feet. So if you want to make use of a display stand for this particular Freddy, most definitely you can do that. As I said, it's interesting about these particular Freddys. We just recently looked at the Springwood Slasher, and then, of course, now we're having a look at this one right now. The thing about these ones, and the why I have looked at these two figures so far, is because, again, these have unique characteristics to them, unique pieces that haven't seen the light of day again. Hopefully, like the Springwood Slasher that I mentioned in that review, I'm hoping that we are going to be seeing ourselves, this Freddy Krueger, make a resurrection, maybe not necessarily from a disfigured baby like this to this, but certainly I hope that NECA Toys will consider, oh please, the idea of re-releasing this guy in the Springwood Slasher version of Freddy Krueger, and really even the Chest of Souls as well from Part 4. Those are all characters, again, that have unique, specific molds to them that we have not seen before. They've already got them in their stockpile. I'm sure they can easily go down that hallway and just kind of pull them off the shelves and re-release this guy, like I said, in his much-needed, fully articulated form, as we certainly have already seen with Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3 Freddy. Sure, his resurrection at the beginning of Dream Child was a bit weak sauce for me. Didn't really make much sense after being defeated in Part 4 how Freddy was just able to come back by simply being born. Nonetheless, though, he did come back and he wreaked havoc again in a more mediocre Nightmare on Elm Street. Of all the nightmares of the original run, I feel like Dream Child is one of the weakest. It's sure one that I enjoy watching. It has entertainment value to it. But I would much prefer to take 4 before I would watch 5. Ironically enough, 4 and 5 seem so connected to one another. If I ever binge watch the Nightmare films, usually I'll watch 4 and then I'll immediately follow it up with Part 5. So it does benefit, at least in that regard, that it is the following up to the better film, if you ask me, with Dream Master. Freddy had a more ridiculous look in the film, more cartoonier than ever. This was more really when Freddy was getting to the more ridiculous side of things. But at least to his credit, or at least what NECA was able to do for the figure, it's one of my favorite, if you could believe it, of the Nightmare figures that have come out. Something about his notable facial features, the elongated arm on the one side and the disfigured foot, all translate to a more interesting standout Freddy than some of the other ones that we'd gotten before. With all the ultimate Freddys, they all sort of follow the same formula, that I feel like this one does break the mold. And hopefully that wasn't the case of NECA actually breaking the mold, because again, if they have them at their disposal, I would love just to see them reuse those same parts again, to give Dream Child Freddy a born-again resurrection in an ultimate figure form, with some much-needed articulation in his lower half. Still a good-looking figure based on a somewhat more mediocre film. Certainly let me know down below, guys, if you've managed to pick up this one for yourself. What you guys think of Nightmare on Elm Street Dream Child Freddy Krueger? Probably a little bit better than the film itself. Also, if you guys are new to this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below, turn the bell notification on, and stay tuned, because we're going to be having a bunch of reviews heading your way of maybe the Nightmare variety. I've been lately getting into the idea of maybe wanting to go back and re-review a lot of my Freddy Krueger figures, specifically the ones that maybe have not gotten the opportunity to become an ultimate figure form. So maybe if you are in the market of checking out some more Freddy reviews, stay tuned to this channel, because like I said, there's going to be a lot of stuff coming your way. As always, guys, thanks for watching as you always do, and I'll see you guys next time.